I thought the Majestic Theater was the end of it. I thought if I just locked the doors and walked away, the mask would stay buried. But some shadows don't stay behind. They follow. They bleed through the airwaves and take root where the cell service dies. Now, the static is screaming in the Appalachian hollows, and the mountains are finally ready for the final act. The old Majestic Theater didn't just fall, it exhaled. A final dusty sigh marked the end of an era, leaving behind only echoes and an unsettling, heavy silence. For decades, it had been a temple of make-believe. But tonight, as the last janitor locked the stage door, the air felt thick with something other than memories. It felt weighted, charged, as if the very shadows were leaning in, eager for the next act. This wasn't a play. This was something else entirely. Something darker that had been patiently waiting for the spotlight to fade, for the audience to leave so it could finally take center stage. And waiting it was. Deep in the concrete labyrinth, past where the costume racks ended, lay the mask. It wasn't static. The tarp felt disturbingly warm, like resting skin. The mask throbbed with a faint internal luminescence. The comedy side was already weeping dark, sticky fluid tracks staining the plaster, while the tragedy half was pulling itself upward, the skin around the mouth tearing to reveal grotesque human teeth. As Elias watched, paralyzed, a wet, tearing noise began, like tendons pulled too taut, with a guttural groan. Elias felt an inexplicable pull. His reflection in the rusted mirror began to distort. The left side of his face felt unbearably heavy, a phantom tear, icy cold, carving a path down his cheek. Simultaneously, the right side of his mouth began to stretch, muscles straining, lips pulling wide into a horrific grin. He was not wearing the mask. He was becoming it. Shadow tendrils were already here, black veins pulsating along the mask's edges and rapidly claiming Elias's arm. Elias tried to pull away, but the comedy side of his face warped into a soundless, tearing laugh. The jagged human teeth grinding together. The tragedy side convulsed in silent, agonizing sobs. The conflicting torments merging into a high-frequency vibration. The inscription, "Soon you will wear IT2," was the final stage direction. With a final sickening crunch, the transformation completed. Elias was gone. In his place stood something new, a living embodiment of the theater itself, its dual nature perfected. He looked into the mirror and saw his own wide, shocked eyes staring back from within the finished mask. The theater, having finally found its ultimate actor, seemed to exhale, shadows thickening around him. This wasn't a play. This was something else entirely, something darker that had been patiently waiting. The theater itself seemed to shift, adapting its architecture to celebrate its new manifestation. The velvet seats hummed with a low, parasitic resonance, eager to absorb this pure, distilled performance. The empty stage didn't just wait. It pulsed, floorboards groaning in anticipation of Elias's first step. Elias took that step. It was a fluid, unnatural motion, completely devoid of the janitor's previous tired gait. He was no longer a human navigating a space. He was the space, the duality of theater, perfected in flesh and shadow. As he moved down the central aisle, the air heavy with a wet, copper tang of ancient tragedies, and the sharp, manic scent of unchecked comedies. He was the perfect, terrifying paradox. His gaze fell upon the intricate, decaying box seats. They weren't empty, not truly. Shadows shifted and coalesced, taking on vague, spectral forms. They weren't actors. They were witnesses. The discarded hopes, amplified failures, and silent, accumulated screams of countless failed productions. They didn't applaud. They shuddered, their collective despair forming a silent, powerful counterpoint. The performance reached its crescendo. Elias didn't need lines or movement. His existence was the script. The conflicting energies, devastating despair and manic, destructive glee collided within him, forming a vortex. The shadow tendrils, now fully integrated, pulsed with each beat of this psychic resonance, creating a terrifying pattern. With a final, agonizing spasm that seemed to ripple through the very foundation of the theater, the performance was complete. The vortex collapsed, the spectral witnesses faded, and a profound, heavy silence reclaimed the Majestic. Elias stood alone, the absolute fusion of comedy and tragedy. A dark monolith commemorating the theater's ultimate victory. The curtain hadn't just fallen, it had sealed. This wasn't a play. This was the final, eternal act. And the theater was finally content. The silence of the Blue Ridge Mountains isn't a lack of sound, it's a presence. It's a heavy, vibrating thing that sits in the back of your throat, waiting for you to make a mistake. People who live in the hollows, the deep, shadowed valleys where the sun only hits for 4 hours a day, know the rules. You don't whistle after dark. You don't answer a voice that sounds like your mother if she's supposed to be miles away. And you never, ever follow a light that wasn't there 10 minutes ago. For Miller, a fire lookout stationed at Peak 47, the silence was his only companion. His job was simple: sit in a glass-walled box 100 feet above the canopy and watch for thin, gray plumes of smoke. For 3 months, he did exactly that. But the mountain has a way of working on a man's mind. It started with the smell, the scent of aging stage makeup and rotting velvet, drifting up from the damp earth below the tower. It had no business being in the middle of an ancient forest. He found the source during a midsummer storm, while searching for a leak in the crawl space beneath the tower's floorboards. Miller's flashlight beam hit something metallic. Bolted to the wood was an antique, wood-paneled shortwave radio. It was a relic of the 1940s. Its faceplate cracked like a fractured skull. It shouldn't have had power. The wires were frayed, chewed through by generations of mountain rats. And yet, the vacuum tubes began to glow. They didn't glow orange like a normal heater. They pulsed with a sickly, rhythmic violet light that seemed to breathe in time with the wind outside. When Miller first turned the dial, he expected the crackle of atmospheric interference. Instead, he heard the muffled acoustics of a vast, empty room. He heard the distant, rhythmic thud of a heavy curtain hitting the floor, and the faint, wet sound of someone weeping in a high balcony seat. It felt connected to something far away, something urban, decaying, and theatrical. As he listened, the violet glow of the tubes intensified, casting long, jittering shadows across the walls of his lookout. The broadcast shifted as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon. The theatrical sounds died out, replaced by a low, rhythmic thumping that matched Miller's own heartbeat with terrifying precision. Then the voices came. It wasn't a single person speaking. It was a dual-frequency transmission. 2 voices overlaid with impossible synchronization. One was a deep, guttural sob of pure tragedy. The other was a manic, high-pitched shriek of comedy. "Soon you will wear ITU too," the voices whispered through the static. Miller's hand flew to the knob to kill the power, but the plastic was fused to the metal. He reached for the plug, but there was no cord. Instead, thick, black veins of shadow snaked from the back of the radio, drilling directly into the floorboards of the tower. He backed away, his boots scuffing against the wood, and that's when he saw the mirror. In the small, rusted vanity mirror he used for shaving, the world had changed. Outside the glass walls, the trees weren't swaying in the wind. They were leaning. Thousands of ancient oaks and pines were tilting toward the tower, their branches clicking together like the teeth of a giant, hungry animal. The forest had become an audience. He could see them now, thousands of pale, unblinking eyes opening in the bark of the trees, all of them fixed on his small glass cage. He looked at his own reflection and felt his heart stop. The left side of his face was beginning to sag, a phantom weight pulling his features into a mask of inconsolable grief. A dark, Ink-like fluid began to leak from his tear duct, carving a permanent stain down his cheek. Simultaneously, the right side of his mouth began to stretch. The muscles tore with a wet, Velcro-like sound. As his lips pulled wide, revealing a mouthful of mismatched, crowded human teeth that didn't belong to him. "Please," he tried to say, but his voice was gone. In its place was a dual-tone frequency that vibrated the glass panes. The shadow tendrils from the radio were no longer just on the floor. They were erupting from the wood, wrapping around Miller's ankles like living, thorny vines. They didn't just touch his skin. They rooted into it. He could feel them pulsing, drawing the heat from his blood and replacing it with the cold, parasitic energy of the theater. The inscription from the Majestic "Soon you will wear," I too began to etch itself into the wooden walls of the tower, glowing with a faint violet heat. Miller realized then that the theater was a virus. It didn't need a building. It needed a witness. It had used the janitor to anchor itself in the city, and now it was using the radio to claim the wilderness. He felt a sudden psychic snap, and for a moment, he saw through the eyes of the man in the mask miles away. They were two actors on the same stage, separated by distance, but joined by the same horrific script. The forest let out a collective moan. The fog rolling through the valleys wasn't mist. It was the breath of the Majestic, transported to the Appalachian heights. The tower began to groan as the trees finally reached it, their bark-covered fingers scratching against the glass, eager to see the final act. Miller's ribs expanded, his chest cavity becoming a hollow resonance chamber for the radio's signal. His lungs became bellows, and his spine fused with the chair. He reached for the dial one last time. He didn't want to turn it off anymore. The comedy side of his mind found the situation hilarious. The tragedy side found it beautiful. With fingers that were now blackened and elongated, he turned the volume to the limit. The sound that erupted from his throat and the radio simultaneously was enough to shatter the glass. The shards didn't fall. They hovered in the air, caught in the violet vortex of the transformation. Miller was gone. In his place stood the transmitter, a fusion of flesh, wood, and shadow, a dark monolith standing guard over the hollow. With a final sickening crunch of bone, the tower lights flickered and died. The violet glow vanished, replaced by a deep, unnatural darkness. The radio fell silent, but the mountain remained changed. If you ever find yourself hiking near Peak 47 and you stumble across an old lookout tower that isn't on the map, don't go up. And if you're sitting by your campfire and the static on your radio starts to sound like a theater curtain closing run, don't look at the trees. Don't look for the eyes in the bark, because the shadows in the hollow are leaning in, and they've been waiting for a new lead actor. The curtain is rising, the forest is watching, and the static is finally calling your name.